Yo YouTube, what's up? The rare livestream recording. Today we are gonna answer all of your questions which you have. We will start with, well, the post which I made a few days ago. There have been at least 30 comments. Let's refresh that just to make sure. At least 30 comments here. And then I also took like 2 questions from the YouTube video which just released, which we will answer as well. And afterwards, chat has the option to also ask some questions. Okay, that being said, let's get started. Do you think Vivian is being released for existing units primarily or has future growth potential? This I think is a really interesting question. Honestly, it is very difficult. Vivian currently works really well. However, she also works the best with physical units, which means primarily Jane, because she can crit her assaults, which is big, and also partially with Piper. The reason why she works so well with Piper is, first of all, Assault Anomaly, but secondly, the EX special of Piper can actually trigger the Bloom twice. One time when the EX starts spinning and one time at the slam down, which is really good because that means she's less reliant on Astra in this case, specifically. That doesn't mean, like, Astra is still her best, but it's just not as necessary as it is for other units. And I would argue she has a lot of future growth potential because of that. Because the problem is Bernice, the burn anomaly is honestly kind of okay for her. The problem is that Bernice does, she doesn't synergize too well with Bernice. Then we have no other ether anomaly, but her ether scaling is pretty good, so she only scales of herself currently. Her shock scaling is honestly pretty low. That means while she works still really well with, for example, Yanagi or even Grace for that matter, shock anomaly is not that great. But the most interesting one, honestly, will be... I think the most interesting one will be an ice anomaly. Like an actual ice anomaly, not like Miyabi. An actual ice anomaly, because her scaling on ice is really good. That could be interesting. How much of an improvement is Vivian Sick Vengeance overcraftable 4 stars? It is about 12%, 12 to 14%, but it depends on the team. Generally speaking, actually, okay, so looking at this, we have Weeping Gemini for a Jane team, which is at about 14% worse. Then we have the Miyabi teams, which is about 12% worse. Then we have Yanagi, which is about 12% worse again. And then we have Grace, which is about 5% worse. So depending on that, there's a big difference. However, that also means Vivian's signature is not that necessary. How much of an improvement is Vivian compared to Jane's Dose M1 or Sick? This is really a difficult question. And I would argue it's actually not that easy to answer. The main reason for why this is difficult to answer is honestly because a large portion of Vivian's damage depends on Jane's damage, which means the more damage your Jane does, the more damage Vivian does. And the better your Jane is built, the better Vivian is gonna work. That means if you have a really shitty Jane, even at M0, S0, your Vivian will not do that much damage, comparatively. But if you have a really well-built Jane, Vivian will be really good. But yeah, she scales off your other units. I want to keep Jane relevant as possible. In that case, you definitely, if you want Jane relevant as possible, I would advertise, going for Vivian if you want to play Jane. Do you think I currently play Jane with Bernice and Lucy? Yeah, that's also something I kind of want to touch on too. You probably want to pair Jane with Astra afterwards. So Jane, Astra, and Vivian. Do you think Vivian is worth pulling for if you have a vertically invested Bernice? No. Vivian does not work well with Bernice, and the main reason is both of them kinda do not want to be on field. They seem to overlap in their role. Yesn't. I think Bernice is a little bit more on-fieldy than Vivian is, but even then the scaling with fire anomaly is kinda not that great. It's a personal question. If I'm specifically pulling to improve my Jane Doe plus Astra team, do you think Vivian or Vivian M1 adds more than Jane Doe Mindscapes? This comes kinda back to the previous question. The more damage your Jane does, the more damage Vivian will do. However, Vivian, so I wouldn't actually say Vivian M1, but I think I would invest first into Jane. I would get Jane Mindscape 2 over... Well, actually, let's pull up the Mindscapes just to make sure. I think actually it was her M4 which was so good. So, Jane M4. This is good. This is also... I mean, this is really good. The M2 is really good. Yeah, so I personally would say M2 and M4 on Jane are probably more important for Vivian's damage than Vivian Mindscapes. Especially Vivian's sake. However, especially Vivian's M2 is really, really good as well. If you have the option and you want to look specifically for Jane, I would say go first for Jane M2. The M1 doesn't matter. The M1 is not relevant. Which means if you can only get M1, I would get Vivian M1. If you can get M2, I probably would get Jane Doe M2 over Vivian Sig and M1. However, M1 Vivian is also more worth than her signature. Team rankings will all other anomaly would be cool. That actually can be answered relatively quickly. Number 1 is Jane and Piper. Then we have Piper specifically, not because it's so much better, but because he doesn't require Astra as much. Then we have Yanagi and Miyabi, and lastly Grace. That would be my ranking. I collect anomalies like Pokemons and got them all for now, and I use them with the exception of Grace. There you go. That is your answer. How much better or worse is Jane Vivian going to be than Jane Bernice? It's about 20 to 30% better than Bernice, of element. I have about 20% better scores with Jane Vivian against Pompeii than I have with Jane Bernice. Is she better for Jane than Bernice? Yes. Please give your take on possible triple anomaly teams. It sucks. The reason is that there is an internal cooldown in the game, which basically prevents you from triggering an anomaly within 3 seconds of another anomaly. And that just results, if you apply too much anomaly, it just results in you not being able to trigger another anomaly for some time. That also means that your bar will just stay full, but it's not actually gonna trigger it. So is it playable? Sure. But it's just much worse than other options. So if I give you reference, it will be also my team bet with a triple anomaly. So Bernice, Jane, and Vivian against Pompeii, I got 23,000 points. If I would have played better, maybe 25, 26,000. However, if I just use Astra instead of Bernice, we are at 45,000. So nearly double that. So yeah. Does the buff better synergize with anomaly agents, which are typically taken as a primary DPS substitute, Miyabi or sub DPS Bernice? Does the buff? I'm unsure which buff you are talking here about, so I will skip this part. How big of an upgrade is she in place of Nicole with Yanagi and Astra? For me personally, a lot, because she's really easy to play. Nicole is not easy to play. If you can play Nicole really, really well, you probably can already 64k using this. So probably not an upgrade. Can you do Vivian versus Bernice comparison? She feels much better with Miyabi, for me personally at least. However, Miyabi really wants Anomaly Mastery in my opinion here, not because it's so much better in terms of score or damage, but because it feels much smoother. The difference is 2%. Can you do Vivian versus Bernice comparison? Outside of Miyabi, it depends. In my opinion, Vivian is about 20% better than Bernice. However, that depends a lot on the team. How good is Vivian with Miyabi in comparison to a Miyabi Yanagi team? I think I had it slightly worse than Yanagi. However, I think you can optimize it. My main problem with Yanagi is Yanagi makes a Miyabi team really easy to play because Yanagi just funnels so many frost stacks to Miyabi that you can just spam your enhanced basic 3. However, because you funnel so many stacks, it is also it is slightly easier to just waste some stacks, at least from my personal experience. So I think honestly they're about even. Pretty good though, especially because Ice and Ether just have, like a shared weakness. I'm still contemplating if I should pull for Vivian or Lighter since I can't get both when version 2.0 is just around the corner. So I would like to ask, how much value does Vivian provide in terms of new team comps and damage contribution? So it's difficult. Again, a lot of her damage depends on your other carry's damage, and she can replace another anomaly unit. So you can play her, for example, with Yanagi and replace, I don't know, like your stunner, Chingy or trigger, whatever. You can also play her instead of Yanagi in a Miyabi team, which would free Yanagi. However, the main problem is she works the best with Jane And according to yourself, you do not have Jane currently. And the more larger problem is she really wants Astra. You will notice a big difference. I know people really don't like it if I say like, oh, she really wants her weapon or she really wants Astra. But man, if you play it, you will see it. You will just see that you have stacks and you cannot spend your stacks. And when you don't spend your stacks, not only do you lose damage, but more importantly, it just feels shit because you're like, I need to spend these stacks, I'm losing damage. You know, it just feels really bad. And that is something which only Astra so far can provide. However, if you play Piper, it's not as bad. So there's that. Phaethon. That's not a question. Does she need to drink blood? Yes, every evening from me. Would she work well with Grey since the 4-piece Phaethon's melody set and her own kit should be affected by Grey spamming her EX? I mean, the uptime is good enough anyway. But I felt like the team was very smooth. It was smooth, it felt good. However, it is still a Grey's team. So if I remember correctly, I got 28,000 points. So it's okay, it works well, it's just not insane. For someone like me who owns every single anomaly char so far, is Vivian worth it? Yes. I don't need to read the rest, yes. Will she be good with Sujuan and Nicole against Ether weak content? I personally do not think she is much of an upgrade she's not much of an upgrade for other options. If you can play Anbi, the normal Anbi, you know, not the Soldier Zero Anbi, the normal Anbi instead. So you just have Sujuan, Anbi, Nicole. That honestly would perform relatively similar. Sure, you have like maybe 20,000 versus 25,000 points, so Vivian could outperform that for sure. But it works. It's not something I necessarily would recommend, but it works, and if you like playing the team, sure, go ahead. Specifically though, this part. I would not recommend playing, again, sentence, brain fart. I would not recommend playing Nicole with Vivian. Not because it doesn't work, but we have the anomaly. For example, assault. Then we have the bloom, which then triggers off assault. Then we have you, which is the player, or for example, Jane, Vivian, you know, Lucy, or let's say Astra, whatever. And then we have the enemy. I don't know, let's say Pompey. You have buffs for yourself, you know, you have buffs. And the enemy possibly has debuffs. So actually, let's make this Nicole, because that makes more sense in this case. When you trigger assault, it will take your buffs into account and your debuffs into account for calculating this damage. So if you have your buffs active and the debuffs active, let's say the assault does 1 million damage, you know, just random number. Now we have a bloom. What a bloom does is it takes the initial hit of this one, but it will take the debuffs from the time when the bloom is being procced. So normally, if the debuff is active while assault procs, a bloom will not profit of the debuff of Nicole. So it will not get this 40% death threat. However, if you have Nicole's debuff active while a bloom procs, it will take these 40% death threat into account, which basically means you want to have Nicole's death threat active when assault is procced, but on top of that also when a bloom is procced. And you simply cannot do that. You don't have enough energy to have her death threat active 24/7. That doesn't work. And that is the main reason why I don't think Nicole is great, because you would need to time all of your EX specials, your assault triggers, and all of your blooms at the same time within those 5 to 6 seconds, 7 seconds maybe, where your death threat is actually active. And that, in my opinion, is not easy. However, if you practice that and you are really good with that, sure, it works. But it's not looking good. I'm hoping Vivian may finally be a unit that Grace can pair with. Yes, she can. Curious to see if you have any thoughts or do any playtesting with those two. Yes, it's also my upcoming video. In my opinion, it felt pretty smooth. However, Grace is still, it's Grace. Then we have, if you play Vivian with another ESA support like Nicole or Astra, what sets would help the most? Support Astral Voice always. I would not run Freedom Blues, her anomaly build-up is already pretty good. If I have every anomaly unit, how much value does Vivian bring to my account? Really good. As someone who has all the anomaly characters, really good. Basically means don't skip her, she's really good. Will there be a what have you to Vivian? Maybe someone in the future. I'm currently at this time of posting a 23-day-old account. I have Sambi, Trigger, S0, Rena, Lycon, Pulcra. Is Vivian, Jane, Hugo Lighter worth pulling for even though I don't have the proper teammates? Or do I skip both banners and save for reruns like Mia beat Caesar? So this is a good point, especially the rerun one. I think especially the 2.0 reruns is a really good point. We have Miyabi, which probably should be your highest priority. Then you also have Astra, which also should be your highest priority. So those two, in my opinion, is what you should focus on. Afterwards, I don't think you should go for Jane, even though Jane pairs really well with Vivian. As long as you don't have Astra, that team is not gonna perform as well. However, you do have Piper probably, or you will get Piper somewhen. And Vivian can pair really well with Piper without the necessity of running Astra. So in my opinion, prioritize Astra over Miyabi, then Vivian. My personal take. Honestly, the difference between Astra and Miyabi is not that big. Just Astra is just so freaking good, you can start her anyway. Is she worth pulling just for Jane? Meaning if Jane is the only anomaly character you have? In my opinion, yes, but you definitely want Astra. Definitely. You can clear without Astra. Again, you can clear without Astra. It's not that it's horrible, it's just a big difference. Will Bernice W engine work? No. Will she? In fact, it's her worst engine choice she has. Will... Outside of Roaring Ride from Piper, that thing is worse. Will she make worth it to run Chaos just 4 times on non-ether agents? I think you mean Chaotic Metal, right? 4-piece Chaotic Metal for the 55% crit damage. The problem is, I don't think so. So the thing is, who would you run? Again, you can pair Vivian with non-anomaly agent. However, I would not recommend that. It works, but everything works in this game. You can solo clear with Miyabi, you know? You don't need actually even a team. However, he just pairs really well with Anomaly Agent, and outside of Miyabi, there are no other characters who really want that, I think. I don't see it. I think it's... Technically it works, and especially if you want to play her with, for example, Su Juan, I think it's really good. But, yeah. Do Vivian has a massive impact for bricked accounts? Definitely not, she is a win more. Is Yanagi's W engine good for her? The bug was fixed, so, well, will be fixed after this video released, you know, when the patch drops. It is fine. It is worse than a craftable engine for her, so, in my opinion, not good enough. But, it is an option. Okay, so much for that. Those are all the questions from here. Which means we are now gonna get to this. I am on low funds. Is she worth pulling for if I already have Bernice and 2.0 is around the corner? So if you have low funds and you have Bernice, I think it might not necessarily be worth it. However, I also don't think it's too bad. It depends a lot on how much you want to take care about your Jane and Piper, I mean, especially, and we also don't know what the 2.0 units are. I think that is the biggest thing right now, because if there will be a physical anomaly unit, even possibly, on release of 2.0, that could be, you know, Vivian could be really good. But I don't think, you know, she's a win more unit, not, she makes your current teams better instead of opening up more options. I know Seth is not that optimal in double anomaly teams, but in a Jane team would it be better to give the AP buff to Vivian or Jane? This, I think, is a really interesting question, because it depends on how well built your Vivian and Jane both are. Vivian scales really well with AP, so a lot of the damage Vivian does comes from her AP. However, a lot of the damage Vivian does also depends on your Jane. So if your Jane is already extremely good and does a lot of damage, it's better to give it to Vivian. Because the moment where your Jane does a lot of damage, Vivian does more damage, and the more damage Vivian takes over from Jane, the better she scales with AP. However, if your Jane is only mediocrely built, it is better to give the AP buff to Jane so your Vivian can already just take this damage in the first place, if that makes sense. TLDR, Jane is good, put AP on Vivian. Jane is not well built and is lacking AP, put AP on Jane instead. Alright, with that we have chat questions. Chat, go ahead. Any questions which haven't already been answered? Jane Yanagi sick over Vivian sick? Yes. I would argue so. Your accent sounds fancy. Thank you very much. I don't think so. Is it worth switching out slot 5 elemental damage to match your main DPS damage? No, definitely not. That's not how it works. If you switch out your, I don't know, ether damage to physical damage, you will just lose damage. You do not gain more damage on the blooms because it takes your Jane's physical damage, not your own. So I tested that because I thought, you know, maybe that would be, but no, you want either attack percent, pen ratio, or ether damage. Anything else, any other damage percent is just gonna be a loss. How big is the difference between Piper, Bernice, Lucy and Piper, Vivian's team? Personally, I found the difference about 3000 score in DA, but that also honestly is the reason, you know, I rarely play Piper, so I have been a little bit rusty, especially against Pompeii, where you just cannot just channel all the time. So you need to adjust your playstyle, but I think it's a pretty good improvement. What's more effective for Vivian? Just all the AP you can get. Ignore any crit damage. Crit Vivian is not a thing, unfortunately. Since most of Feather Stack come from parry, would facing passive boss that rarely do yellow flash change how she plays? Yes. For example, against Pompeii, who you basically can just parry 24/7, she really has no problems whatsoever, and you will also notice Astra a little bit less. However, especially against like UCC, who does nothing but red flashes, you kind of have a problem a little bit because you need to utilize your quick assists, which then will set you directly in the Noblewoman wall stand, so the yellow, the glowing thing with the open umbrella, which then gives you 1 stack. So you need a lot more Astra against passive enemies than against enemies who have a lot of parry opportunities. Is there any alternative other than Nicole Astra for Vivian teams? I would not play Nicole. I would prefer any other stunner or support over Nicole, personally. But Astra is her best in slot unless you are running Piper. Is it safe to say that getting lighter for Evelyn would be more of an upgrade over getting Vivian to replace Bernice in Miyabi's team? Probably, yeah. I would argue so. If you don't intend on playing Jane or Piper, I think so, yes. Does a bloom get buffed by attribute anomaly buffs? Yes, because it increases the base damage. It doesn't increase, you know, if your assault does 1 million damage and you now do 18% more damage, it does 1.18 million damage, as an example. So, because the bloom basically snapshots 50% of it, it's not a literal snapshot, but, you know, it takes like about half of the damage. You know, 50% of 1 million is less than 50% of 1.18 million. Best stopping point for Mindscape? Depends on how much money you have, but M6 is really good, otherwise M2. Is Vivian a better teammate for Yanagi than Bernice? Yes. What do you think about the ERD6 on Vivian? Not good. Why do they keep calling it flight mode? Yeah, I don't know. Any example for the other alternatives? Lucy. After all this time, is Miyabi's W engine still a must-have for Miyabi? Yeah. Have both and really don't want to put too much into Miyabi. In my opinion, it's the most she's the most reliant on her engine out of all. In retrospect, since we have 3 premium ice agent and 1 premium fire agent, is Lighter a good pull now? I mean, Lighter is probably really good for Hugo. He is really good for Alan. He is really good for Soldier 11. He is really good for Eve, and he is really good for DPS Sukaku or any other ice, you know, and also Miyabi obviously. So if you play any of those units or multiple of them, I think Lighter is a good pull. How much field time does Vivian take in comparison to Bernice? Much less. I just turned in, I don't know if you talked about this. I would like to hear your opinion on if you would pull Vivian for Jane, yes. And what are your thoughts and favorite characters out of the 2.0 trailer? Whatever this dragon girl is called, that is my favorite character. I don't care too much about the rest for now. But honestly, the rabbit girl has an interesting design, I think, but outside of that, the favorite character is the dragon girl. Dragon mechanic girl, I don't know what the exact name is. Yes, I would definitely pull Vivian for Jane. Not even a question. Is Vivian a good alternative for Yanagi for Miyabi? Yes. Might get Jane engine is what I would recommend if you wanna get... Well, honestly, they also nerfed Time Weaver now, so I guess. You didn't mention pen percent in your video. I think I calced it, but I didn't include... Like, I calced it afterwards because it was just worse. I did it here. Also ignore these, I changed some stuff. There, pain ratio is about 5% worse than the rest. You would pull Vivian even if you're Bernice? Yes. Is Jane better than Piper if you don't have Astra? Good question. I'm honestly not sure. I think yes. I mean, you know, I can look into my teams, which I did here. Depends on... Oh, those have all been with Astra. Maybe not. Maybe not. So, according to the tests I did without Astra, Jane does worse than Piper. To be fair, I also only tested Jane, Caesar, and Caesar is not that great for Vivian. So, yeah. Orpheus is the name of Dragon Girl. Well, then Orpheus. How does Vengeance and Electric Loss perform over Gemini? It is answered in my video guide. Gemini is better. I have to go now, but wanted to let you know that I appreciate you taking the time to do this Q&A. Really sets you apart from there as well. No problem. Thank you very much for watching and tuning in. I do hope that you have a good evening, night, morning, day, whatever. I think Bernice is the type unit you want multiple of, so pulling Vivian is worth it. I have a hard time comparing Bernice and Vivian, because I think they fulfill kinda different roles. They are similar, but they fulfill different roles. How does Vivian Vengeance confirm with other anomaly units? Worse. It's not that great. Anomaly buildup is cool and all, but you basically just have 40% anomaly buildup and 90 AP, and that's it. Nothing else. So it kinda performs worse, or even with A-rank engines. So it's an alternative, but it is not much better, in my opinion. There's no other anomaly agent currently who does ether damage, so kinda impossible to utilize the second part. So the thing is, if we ever get another ether anomaly unit, they really would like to hate AP. Because, you know, you have anomaly buildup, 40%, anomaly proficiency here, and your only condition is deal ether damage every 5 seconds. That is the only condition. So if we get an anomaly ether unit, which can deal ether damage once every 5 seconds, and they don't fucking hate AP, this will be really good. However, I can imagine they designed this with something in mind, which basically will be, hey, the next ether anomaly unit is only once attack and converts part of her attack into AP. But she doesn't really want that much AP. You know, that is something I can imagine. And at that point, the conversion of attack to AP would need to be better than what this engine actually gives. So that's interesting. Have you tried killing Butcher Dead as Assault and Beta server with M0 Astra Jane Vivian? I have not done Butcher. I did mostly Pompeii. Pompeii and UCC. It is possible to kill Pompeii though. So there's that, and that has neither physical nor ether weakness. So I would be very surprised if Butcher would not work. Also, you get a lot of stun windows. The thing is with Butcher and Typhoon is you probably want her signature because you get so many stun windows that Weeping will not actually get a lot of stacks. You probably want M0 S1. I think it's just cause Weeping Gemini gives so much AP. Yeah, basically. But it depends on your Jane a lot, you know? Actually, we can do this. I think that's interesting. Right now, we have Weeping Gemini at 86%. You know, let's just screenshot this. This is basically the before one. Before Jane assaults 700k. This is the number I went with. If your Jane does 700k for her assaults, this is approximately what you will get. However, now comes the interesting part. So, let's say you now don't do... Okay, it's 780k actually what I did here. Calculation was 780k, so let's use that one. Let's say the calculation now doesn't give 781k, but instead gives 450k. Okay, let's just say you do 450,000 instead with your Jane, instead of whatever the calculation said here, which is 780k. Which, to be fair, is quite realistic. And this is outside of the stun window, so keep that in mind as well. I mean, this is the average, but you can hit 780k outside of the stun window with a good Jane. Takes a while, sorry for that. I did it differently for the other ones because I didn't meant to do that, didn't want to do that. But yeah, let's do it now anyway here. That's all. Okay, you see the difference, right? Oh, did I not adjust this? I think I didn't adjust this. Wait, where's the R5 here? And Fusion Compiler in itself is missing as well. So here we want 450k as well. So basically we can see now Weeping Gemini in itself didn't change too much compared to previously. We can see that Time Weaver got better. Electro Lip Gloss got also slightly better, but the difference right now is not that big. However, we can see the core damage went down by 10%. Core damage was a 70% before. So this doesn't make too much of a difference yet. But let's say your Jane does 300,000 instead of 500. 450,000. So the Jane is now not that great. Now, this still doesn't change too much, but her damage distribution does less and her core does less. I mean, overall, stuff gets slightly better, but it's not too much. Like, the bottom part gets better, the top part gets worse. Lip gloss is now at 81%, and it was before at 77, 78%. Time Weaver gets better as well. But basically, the worse this gets, let's make it 200,000. I don't know how you get 200,000 assaults with your Jane, but let's say your Jane is really bad. You know, maybe you get 200,000. Now, you know, Weeping will basically always stay the second best option. This is not really gonna change. But now suddenly you have like Time Weaver at 84% instead of 78%. It gets closer. Now Time Weaver is at least better than this one. But yeah, it changes. The main difference is the core, which changes. You know, a lot of your damage now suddenly is not your core anymore. And your damage distribution just goes down. But also, to be fair, you would not hit this Pompeii HP threshold here. So there's that. If you have no Astra, would you pull Vivian and Vengeance or Vivian and Jane? I would pull Vivian and Jane. Simply because Weeping Gemini is just so much better. Well, not better, but you know, it's like a 10%, 15% loss, depends on how well your units are built and stuff. I don't think that her Vengeance is actually that great compared to her M1 or getting a Jane. Imp for actual unit has Ether type damage content, sure, definitely. But basically, the less damage, you know, your DPS does, the less will she also contribute also from her core. Vivian value if you have Yanagi and Miyabi, good. I think Vivian's value is generally really good. Not even based on like one specific thing. Okay, I think that have been all questions so far, or at least the most important ones, which basically means thank you YouTube for watching, thank you Twitch for participating. I hope that most questions have been answered. If not, leave them in the comments below. Chat, of course, for you as well. If you still have questions, leave them. I will still be here for a while. And with that, I wish you a great day. Peace.